Hello, and welcome to Palisade Corporation's webcast, Hurricane Evacuation Models Using At-Risk, presented by Henry Yennie, Manager, Emergency Preparedness Section of Louisiana Department of Health and Hospitals. My name is Jameson Romeo Hall, and I will be your host today, and I will be available to help answer WebEx technical questions by chat. If you experience technical difficulties joining this WebEx session, please dial 1-866-229-3239. Alternately, you can email technical questions to support@webex.com. At this time, all attendees are in a listen-only mode. Please note that as an attendee, you are part of a larger audience today. The attendee list is suppressed to maintain attendee privacy. We will be holding a Q&A session at the conclusion of today's presentation. You may ask an online question anytime throughout the presentation today by clicking on the question mark icon located in the floating toolbar on the bottom right side of your screen. We invite you to sit back and relax and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to introduce your presenter, Henry Yennie. Henry, in one moment, you will have the control. There we are.
I'm hoping everybody can see that, Jameson. Does it look okay to you?
It looks good.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for attending. I wanted to give you a little background, first of all, about the context and the situation in which we deployed at risk to try to solve a problem. Go into some detail about the problem and the solution that was developed, as well as the outcome. We hadn't planned to actually test the results of the model so quickly, but we had the results finished in May, and then we had 2 hurricanes last month. So it actually gave us an opportunity to really show senior leadership in a number of agencies in Louisiana, the efficacy of the solution. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. You know, it's no secret hurricanes are the predominant natural disaster threat along the Gulf Coast, and it's the event around which most emergency planning is done from year to year by all the agencies at all levels of government and in private industry. And as you can imagine, since Katrina, the role of government has escalated dramatically, and the expectations of government, both in response planning and response and recovery to that sort of event have grown tremendously. There's an underlying assumption in emergency management that's kind of the mantra, I believe, across the country, and that all disasters are local. And much of the planning to respond to a disaster should be local, but in events like hurricanes, and particularly major hurricanes, generally the state and or the federal government's going to have to get involved. And that's essentially what happened with the last 4 major storms that have hit Louisiana in the past 3 or 4 years. A little background about where we fit in all of this. Since Katrina and Rita, almost all emergency preparedness activities happen under something called the National Incident Management System, which is driven largely by FEMA. And the little graphic to the right, just if you look at this area here, if you can see the mouse where I'm moving the mouse, is generally where we are. We're part of the Human Services branch as Health and Medical, and we're known as ESF-8, or Emergency Support Function 8. But in this basically Emergency Operations Center, you have most every state agency and federal agency that have a role to play are represented. And this is generally where response activities are conducted and a lot of recovery activities are conducted. To give you a little idea in Louisiana of government's expectations and the public's expectations of what the government can do in just a few areas. The government has a large role in what's known as assisted evacuation, and that's going to be the focus of what we talk about today. It's also known in Louisiana as critical transportation needs. These are people, basically a population group that doesn't have the means to evacuate. They either don't have a car, car's not working, no place to go, so they need some help in evacuating out of an area that's going to be impacted by a hurricane. And again, that's going to be the focus of what we talk about today. Other areas where government has large roles is, of course, in sheltering. In our particular area at the Department of Health and Hospitals, it's a lot of medical special needs sheltering, dealing with home health and homebound patients, dialysis patients. There's lots of people that are receiving medical care in homes, fairly intense medical care in homes that 10 years ago would have been in a hospital or a nursing home. And that's become a large problem, really, across the country. We also spend a lot of time in supporting the healthcare infrastructure in terms of supplies and fuel and generators and this kind of thing for those facilities that are sheltering in place or choose not to evacuate. And, of course, a lot of effort in evacuating hospital and nursing home patients who might be directly impacted. We also have responsibility for mass fatality and disinterment. It's one of the larger things we're dealing with right now in the southwestern part of Louisiana. About 300 graves were disturbed due to the storm surge from Ike. And we have to mount some operations to go recover those caskets, make sure that they're identified, recasket them if necessary, and then reinter them. And then again, recovery is going to be ongoing. But as you can see, there's a lot of areas where government's expected to play a role. The result of all of this, and from my perspective, generally as a planner, is there is a huge pressure for the number. Everybody wants to know what the number is in a lot of contexts. In our example, the number is how many people need help getting out of town. And that's the problem that we were confronted with, is trying to come up with an estimate of the number of citizens in various at-risk areas who may need a ride. And again, these are referred to as the critical transportation needs population. It's an important number, and it's one that everybody spent a lot of time planning around because that drives that number of 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 drives a whole chain of events downstream. Planning for food and water and medical triage for those that are evacuated, sheltering for those that are evacuated. And since Katrina, Louisiana has to worry about pet evacuations and sheltering and tracking pets and making sure that pets can be tied back to owners. And there's a myriad number of other things that downstream from that number are impacted by that number. So it's a pretty important number. And the way it was done in the past, up until this current year, our lead emergency management agency in the state is an organization called the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. They're essentially the coordinating entity for emergency management in the state. And each county or parish in Louisiana has something called an Office of Emergency Preparedness. These are parish-based, parish-funded entities. And they interact with the state, the governor's office, in managing and planning for and managing and responding to events. In planning for hurricane evacuations, these were typically done in what were known as parish coordination meetings, where the governor's office would call in each parish in the affected areas, generally the coastline of Louisiana. There's about 22 parishes that are potentially at risk for major hurricane impacts. And they would call in each of these parishes and in addition call in the supporting state agencies that provide services in an emergency. For us, it was ESF8, as ESF8, would have to participate in these parish coordination meetings. And these were done annually, generally in March or April before hurricane season starts. And the focus basically in the past was this was the opportunity for the local emergency managers to present their wish list. This is what we think we're going to need. We're going to need X number of pallets of water, X number of MREs, 4 tractors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the big need was we're going to need buses, planes, and trains, anything with wheels or wings, to evacuate those people out of our parish that don't have a ride. And generally, that method, from the governor's office perspective and from the supporting state agency perspective, was simply to ask the parish what they thought the number was. There was no vetting of the estimate, no pushback in terms of how did you come up with that number. And what I learned over time, and you know, don't have to be real smart to figure that out, is a lot of these guys were just guessing. They had experiences after Katrina. They took those experiences and just basically formed guesses, and that was the number they gave to the state, the governor's office, and all of the supporting state agencies. Here's the number. And that number then was used as the planning factor for all these downstream requirements, for the number of buses, the number of meals, the number of pets that needed to be evacuated, the critical transportation needs shelter spaces that were needed. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but in our experience here is that once that number gets established, it becomes sacred. It almost becomes impossible to change, even though it may fly in the face of facts. It becomes the number, whether it's right or wrong. And in this past year, a lot of state agencies began to push back on that method, saying, gee, there's got to be a better way to do this rather than just asking the locals to guess at these numbers. And a big driver of that was the cost implications of those numbers. And I'm showing you just a small example, just to activate the state coach bus contract, which is the primary vehicle that the state would use to get people out of harm's way. That costs $6 million just to turn it on. And that doesn't actually get a bus moving. It just notifies the company that, hey, we may use you, so we need you to get all your systems in place and start organizing. And that costs $6 million when you pull that trigger. So it's a huge decision. And what's not shown on here is that decision is typically made at a point in time called H102, or an H hour that's set. H102 refers to 102 hours before tropical storm force winds hit the coast of Louisiana. That's not landfall. It's tropical storm force winds hitting the coast. So that's almost a week ahead of time before a storm may impact Louisiana. So it's a very critical decision. It's a very expensive decision. And that's only one example of the things that have to start being put in place to make things happen to get people out of harm's way. The total contract is for 700 buses that come from all over the country, and that's not guaranteed. The availability of coach buses is at the time based on market availability. I believe in the entire country there may be less than 2,000 coach buses in total. So these buses and the contractor that is providing these vehicles basically subcontracts with hundreds of bus companies across the country, and they come in waves. They don't all come at once, and as you can imagine, it requires large staging areas, dispatch efforts, tracking operations. There's a lot of wraparound that goes around getting a bus to Louisiana, getting people on it, and moving that bus to a shelter. So state agencies began to say, gee, how did you get that number? What population number are you using to base it on? And turned back to ourselves and basically said, shouldn't we have data to help us come up with our own estimates? Why do we need to rely on pure guesses? And so this year, a new method was proposed, and that was basically to tap into a variety of state data sources all over the place to try to see if we couldn't come up with a better estimate of in each of these areas as to who might need a ride out of town. The big $64,000 question, or the $6 million question, was who was going to do this and what data were we going to be used. Our governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness has no data analysis capability. They got lots of technology, lots of computers, lots of technical staff, but they don't have any analytical platforms, and they don't have any database guys. They're hardware people and communications people and radio people. This was a large life lesson for me in terms of not opening your mouth in a meeting, because then you get the assignment. And that's in a nutshell what happened. there was no one else to do it. I was there and volunteered. And so what we did was basically agree to form a working group to construct a logic model. How are we going to go about arriving at this estimate? What state data sources were we going to use? And I've listed the 4 primary data sources we used, a variety of post-Katrina population estimates, obtaining driver's license data, Medicaid enrollment data, and data about how many school buses and other vehicles parishes owned and operated at the time. And then to create a model based on that data to come up with an estimate of how many people might need a ride, and then compare that with what the parish has requested, and basically negotiate. And this graphic, I'm hoping you can see this. It might not be large enough. Kind of gives you the flow of our thinking about how we would go about this. So, and quite honestly, when you boil it down, it's pretty simple. We got population estimates by age buckets, subtracted the number of people with active driver's license by age buckets, and then that gave us the people without active driver's licenses. And in our simple way of thinking, we thought that might be the group that's most at risk to need a ride. Everybody's at risk to need a ride, but that group, the people without active driver's licenses, particularly in the 65 and older age group, were probably the most at risk for needing help getting out of town. And then we applied some other risk factors based on poverty level. We used Medicaid data as a proxy for that. We had estimates of institutionalized people in hospitals and nursing homes that were going to get out by other means. And then we inserted at-risk simulation modeling into that equation at that point that generated some output for us based on all of those numbers for us to be able to say, here's how many people we think in your area may need a ride out of town, and then held some meetings with some of the parishes to see what they thought about it. This basically is just another view of what we did. And I'll be honest with you, I wish I could tell you that we had a lot of data to apply these risk factors or to come up with these risk factors. Bottom line, we guessed. And I'll just leave it at that. We guessed and didn't have a better way to do it at the time. Now, the problems we had with the data presented an interesting kind of challenge. It sounds easy enough to get driver's license data. In Louisiana, we discovered it took us over a month to get it out of our Department of Motor Vehicles because they were right in the middle of a change of systems from a 30-year-old mainframe system to a more modern system. But essentially, we had to extract data out of a mainframe. And what we got was over 5 million records. We had 6 variables per record. Date of birth, the date the driver's license expired, the parish the driver's license was issued in, and a couple of other variables. And what we got was one big text file with one long string of numbers. One single line of text with no delimiters. So it took us a little while to be able to parse that into a data set that was useful. And then what we discovered was there's a lot of error in driver's license data. In Louisiana, for example, the number of active driver's licenses often exceeded the total parish population. And we had little anomalies like 100,000 active licenses for people that were under the age of 5, and over 30,000 active licenses for people over the age of 90. So there were a lot of things. You had to look at that data and then make adjustments to it. And again, those adjustments we made were guesses. We put some parameters around it using at-risk and using some distributions, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But basically, a lot of the core data that was used to construct the model was based on some guesses. And to me, that's what made at-risk most attractive to use for this. Another example was the data that we had on school buses in each of the parishes was 3 years old, and often didn't jive with what the parishes said they had currently. And it also didn't take into account the ability of the vehicle or the shape of the vehicle. Some of them were broken, some of them could go around the block, but they couldn't go 100 or 300 miles. So there was a lot of source data problems that were dealt with using distributions and some guesses. And I'm not the statistical genius that probably should be doing this, but generally we used a triangular distribution because that type of distribution seemed to fit the data that we had. The parameters for a lot of the distributions were mostly based on guesses, where we had maximums and minimums. I mean, we certainly used them, but for things, certain large things, we simply had to guess at what the distribution of the data might be. And in total, we defined about 233 different variables using that method. We used it on population estimates, driver's license estimates, poverty factors, risk factors, the number of people at any one point in time in hospitals or nursing homes, et cetera, et cetera. And we used all of that to generate a couple of outputs, both overall for those 22 parishes or 11 parishes that we actually studied overall, and then for each parish, the number of people that might be at risk for needing transportation, the number that the parish itself, using its own assets, might be able to get out, therefore leading to the number that might need state assistance and the number of coach buses that might be needed to render that assistance. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly just to give you some idea of our thinking and how we might have applied some of those risk factors. For those people that did have driver's licenses, you couldn't assume that they all could get out. They may not have a car. Their car may be broken. They may not have enough money to pay for gas to get out of town. They may not have a place to go and would therefore need some help getting somewhere. So we assigned risk factors even to those with active driver's licenses. And for those without driver's licenses, again, that was the group that we thought was probably most at risk, particularly those that were 65 and over. But we did apply risk factors to each of those age groups, even for people for the people without driver's licenses. Just to give you an idea of some of the stuff we used for the vehicles in terms of their availability and their capacities, these were the planning factors and the distribution factors we used to kind of arrive at those final numbers. And now I want to kind of really go through what we got out of that effort. In this yellow column where it says 2008 requests, these were the actual requests from the parishes. So if you look at Orleans Parish, for example, their guess was, we think we're going to need transportation to move 25,000 people. And using the estimated capacity of coach buses, that would mean about 500 coach buses just to move those 25,000 people. This next set of columns that's titled 2008 Estimated Transportation Need was the model output. So you can see, if you look at Orleans Parish, where they estimated 25,000, our model estimated about 17,000. And on down the line. There's some parishes where the model significantly, the model output was greater than what the parish requested. And then the final four columns in green summarize what we thought the parish capability was, what the resulting gap was, and the resulting state coach need. So all total, if you looked at what the parishes said they needed, they would have required about 1,000 coach buses, which when you sat across the table from somebody, you could honestly say that's probably not going to happen. There's probably not that many coach buses in the country that can make it to Louisiana within 72 hours to get your people out. And then you compare that to what our model produced, and it was about 716 coach buses, a little more than what the state had contracted for. And we'll get into some comfort levels in a moment. I'm going to go through a couple of slides that just show you the output and the reason I liked the way that At Risk gave you options to display that output to people that needed to make those decisions. They could very easily see, and the concept we were trying to get across in this whole effort was there's not a number. There's a range of numbers, because all of the things that go into trying to determine how many people might need help in getting out of town are so complex and so unknown and so uncertain, to hang your hat on a number might be kind of foolish, and that what you need to think about is a range of numbers and probabilities of some of those things happening along that distribution. And so we gave them output similar to this. It said, okay, here's how many people might need help. Here's what the parishes may be able to do in terms of the numbers of people they might be able to move. Here's the gap that needs to be filled by the state. And here's the number of coach buses that the state might need. And then at-risk has some very powerful capabilities for being able to show people probabilities. If somebody wanted a 95% comfort level, you could show them that and what that meant in terms of the number of buses that might be needed, what the means were, what the standard deviation was. So they get some idea of the uncertainty involved, but give them enough information where they can make a better decision rather than making a decision based on a number that's really kind of pulled out of thin air. In terms of sensitivities, that's the other feature I really like about at-risk is of all the things that you're uncertain about or have data about or are simply unknown, which ones make the most difference in the model's output. And for this particular model, the one thing that across the board made the most difference was what we used as a general risk factor for those without driver's licenses. Small percentage changes in that risk factor made huge differences in the output of the model. And I'm going to focus now on the two largest parishes in that at-risk band of 11 on the southern coast of Louisiana, Orleans and Jefferson. Together, those two parishes account for almost 800 to 900,000 people in total for a total population. So about a quarter of the state's population live in those two parishes. They were the most concerned, obviously because of the size. And again, Orleans had said, gee, we might need help with 25 to 30,000 people. They had actually had another study done by the Corps of Engineers that estimated 77,000 people may need help. And Jefferson had an estimate of 13,000. And as I said before, if you use just the parish estimates for those two parishes, that would consume more than the state contract could deliver. So it was obviously not a viable alternative. The model output, again, was slightly different. About 18,000 people that may need help, and about 275 some odd buses for Orleans, about a little less than 10,000 people in Jefferson, and about 180 buses. Now, this is what actually happened for Gustav, for Hurricane Gustav, because those two areas did evacuate. This first column shows the parish request, what they thought they were going to move, a total of about 38,000 people. Our model said, well, gee, that might be really more like 26,000 people, and what they actually ended up moving was 26,000 people. Orleans moved 18,500, and Jefferson moved about 7,500. And if you look at the model error, we were all kind of breathless at how close we actually were to what actually happened. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, we're not geniuses, so it was either extraordinary luck or there might be something to the approach we took. And the benefits of at-risk in that whole process and in that model was obviously the simulation benefits were obvious to us. With so many unknowns and so many uncertain variables that impact, and we're absolutely confident the model's not complex enough. I mean, this was kind of our first attempt to try to get our hands around something very, very squishy. But it did give us a capability to produce output that could be easily understood by the governor, by the people that ran these agencies, by the people that were contracting for the coach buses, and by the parishes. They were able to understand what that meant, and they began to grasp that concept of variability and a range of things rather than trying to focus on a single number. The other thing that was helpful to me was the current version of at-risk runs these kinds of models really very quickly. I had originally constructed it under the older version of at-risk, I think 4.5. and also using the new version of at-risk, 5.01. And the older version took about an hour to run these models and produce the output. The current version did it in less than 2 to 3 minutes. It was absolutely breathtaking. So that meant that if somebody wanted to change something, or let's see what happens if we decide that Orleans has 200 school buses instead of 50, you could rerun that model really very quickly and give people the output they needed. In terms of what's next, our job, we think, is continuing to educate senior leadership on the value of this type of modeling and the type of output they get. And I think the outcomes from Gustav may have sold them on that concept. And of course, we have the potential to further develop this particular model, because now we have actual evacuation data that we can start to look at and start to use. But this type of modeling for me as a planner has implications for a lot of other areas in what we do. And our goal is to develop some consistent data sources and basically a data management strategy that would feed these models, and to start to develop some basic models for other plans that we have to deal with that are listed here. Where in the past we're constantly driven by pressure from the federal government and from other state agencies for that number, we can now give them some information that I think is much better. It's just a much better planning tool. And Jameson, that's really kind of all I had for right now. I'd be glad to take any questions if anybody had anything, or to show you kind of the actual model itself, and just kind of walk through some things if you'd like.
Oh, would you like to show just a minute or two of the model?
Sure.
I'm really excited that things worked out so well. I'd like to say it wasn't just luck.
Well, you know, I at this point, I'm just accepting that it happened. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's a great platform to work from, and it was kind of proof of concept for a lot of people. So I'll just walk through real quick, just the model itself. In this first page is just generally a summary. We have tabs for each parish, where we input the particular data for the parish, and it's kind of summarized here. And the feature in at-risk that I liked just hugely was the ability to browse the results for each of the output cells. So here's the output cell for the total transportation need for those 11 parishes. That was just not something easily done in the other version. And I just think this is the coolest thing, because it's interactive. You can change what you want to look at and what sorts of output and confidence levels you want, just kind of on the fly. And that was, I mean, you could do that in the other version, but you had to do it. It wasn't kind of native to Excel. I just think this is very cool.
Oh, good. They worked really hard on this. So that
I think it's a great feature, and the ability to do other sorts of sensitivity analysis just right in that chart is very cool. But generally, this was the slide that I showed you before. It's just the main summary page that showed what the parishes had requested, what the model output was, and then what that meant in terms of numbers of things. And then here was the little matrix that we used for where we took Medicaid enrollment as a proxy for poverty, and then basically just applied a risk factor based on that parish's and that population group's relation to the total in that group. And here's where these factors for poverty and for just general risk, general transportation risk, were used, for example, in New Orleans. Now, the thing that was interesting about the population numbers, we had, because of after Katrina, the population numbers in that area were almost unknown. And you had ranges from the U.S. Census Bureau saying 220,000 people lived in Orleans Parish, and the parish telling you, oh no, it's 400,000.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, nobody really knows until they do the next census. So we would compromise and get the best data we could. And generally it was 2006 census estimates. But there's still a lot of disagreement locally about these numbers. And then we had Medicaid enrollment that was fairly easy to get.
Was there anybody that gave you any trouble besides your DMV with the?
No, that was really it. We found it very difficult to get data out of the feds because we did want home health data, and at least in Louisiana, about 70% of those people receiving home health services they get those services paid for by Medicare, not Medicaid. So the vast majority of people getting chronic home health patients are Medicare patients, and it's fairly difficult to get data out of the federal government that you can analyze. For example, to get that kind of data by a parish level with some severity indicators, diagnostic information, that kind of thing, and ages. We're still kind of working on that. But generally, this look and feel was consistent for every parish. So we had every parish looks the same, and we just kind of replicated that for the 11 that were our focus. And again, nothing hugely complicated. And I'm sure it can be improved upon, and other people will improve upon it. But it was a way for us to start and kind of get our hands around it, and seemed to work okay.
That's good. That's I'm excited to pass this along. We have a question here.
Okay.
Oh yeah, here it is. Henry, it's good to see the government is crunching some numbers. Do you meet any resistance from any government officials?
Actually, no. I was really kind of pleasantly surprised. People, or at least in this little part of our world in emergency management, are hungry for data. It's been my experience that, with certain exceptions, a lot of decisions and a lot of plans are made without a whole lot of data analysis. And I think this tool was simple enough for people to understand. It's simple enough for me to operate. I'm not the at-risk expert, and I'm not a statistical genius, but I do think it gives us tools that are very practical, very powerful. The challenge is to get people off of this mindset of give me a number. And the higher you go in government, both from local to state to federal, and then from people like me who are in a cube to people in the bigger offices, there's an education component of you really need to think about more than just the number. Because again, once those numbers get said or uttered, they tend to become sacred, and this, I think, kind of breaks that mindset of being so rigid about things, and to begin to help people understand that there are ways to deal with variability and uncertainty and the tremendous amount of unknowns, particularly in emergency management. Does that make sense?
Yes. And we'll wait a minute. Maybe we'll get another question. Any other thoughts?
I'd really just kind of like to publicly thank you guys. You were very supportive in providing the software for us, and giving us the tools to do this. It was much appreciated. And we've got lots of ideas about how to use this on a lot of other things, including using I mean, I've used at-risk for a lot of budgeting problems, a lot of budget estimate problems. For example, we used it to construct a model for the cost of reinterment of some of these disinterred caskets in Cameron Parish. And we just like to continue to learn it and use it and kind of institutionalize it, I think. I think that would make the most sense for us. That's the first question we ask is where's the uncertainty here, and how can we put a fence around that uncertainty that makes some sense? And this tool is the perfect way to do it, in my view.
Oh, that's so good to hear. I know we mentioned you in our blog, and I guess marketing is very exciting in our relationship because what you're doing is great. So, and I really appreciate helping us out too.
Well, sure, it's my pleasure. It's a great tool.
How did it go with the buses? Were they actually able to supply the buses?
They were. There were some logistical problems with tracking the buses. For example, based on largely feedback from some of the data around this, there was a lot of pressure on the local parishes to use their school buses.
Oh.
And because a lot of them had decided they were not going to use them, and there were a lot of reasons why they didn't want to. But when faced with the facts of, if you don't, do you really want that picture in the paper again? And B, there's just not enough other assets to move that amount of people, so you have to use them. And so it forced some locals to move and budge in that area. And the problem was, though, that those local school buses didn't have GPS units. They didn't have radio communications. So a lot of that stuff had to be kind of thrown together at the last minute.
They're known among students as cheese buses.
Right. They're not air conditioned, so you had to be careful about the types of people you put on the school buses, and because they may have had anywhere from a 4 to a 12-hour ride to North Louisiana to where the shelters were, and that can be pretty brutal if you're 70 years old and kind of disabled. So there's some challenges still, and again, people's expectations have to be managed. That some people were evacuated by plane, and I know at some of the local parish pickup points that people were demanding to be flown out instead of riding on a bus, and the point has to be made, this is life-saving, it's not vacation.
Right.
So, but there's you find this kind of phenomenon in Florida as well. There's an expectation by the public that keeps escalating.
Goodness. Well, I wonder if they're going to start using your model there.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know. I know we're going to probably, over the next couple of months, as we finish these after-action analyses and meetings and reports about what worked, what didn't work, what can we do better, there may be an opportunity to introduce this concept in a lot of places, particularly with the federal government. They tend to be the most rigid. I hope there are no feds on the phone, but...
Well, I guess we don't have any other questions from our attendees.
Well, again, I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope it was useful. And,
very useful. Thank you very much.
Be glad to share it if somebody wants it.
What I'll do is I'll send out the link to this archived recording. As soon as we archive it, I'll send it out to the attendees, and then anybody else. It'll also be on our website, on our live webcast page, and it can be viewed at any time.
Terrific. Is there anything else you need from me?
I don't think so. I think we're all set. I really appreciate this, Henry.
Well, Jameson, thank you again.
Thank you. And thank everybody else, too. Thank you for coming.
Will do.
And I'll be seeing you soon.
Okay. Thanks,
Great.
Jameson.
Hey, thanks.
Take care.
Yes, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.